Take it away, Mike.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Huddle. So, we are going to dig deeper into part of what we talked about last week. We talked about the settlement last week a little bit, and we also talked about the buyer's guide because it's now out and live. You can get a copy of your own. You can print it. You can also go ahead and take this link that I'm going to put in your chat, right? That's sort of what we talked about last week. But this week, what we want to talk about is a little nittier, grittier details and some of the consequences of this lawsuit and the settlement. And some of those consequences are, we are predicting, though we don't know, we are predicting that we as listing agents will likely see a significant number, or let's just say more than we do now, number of unrepresented buyers. And today we're going to talk about multiple things, but the first thing we're going to talk about is how do we handle unrepresented buyers, and how do we make the decisions if we are going to be limited agents? How do we, what type of information can we share? What type shouldn't we share? And where do we draw the line as listing agents when we encounter in the wild unrepresented buyers, which I think all as an industry are sort of predicting that's going to be a more common occurrence than it is today. So that being the case, I think what we're going to do today is we're going to sort of tee up. We do have, everybody's familiar with the unrepresented buyer disclosure, and I'm going to go over it real quick, but I think the core of the unrepresented buyer disclosure, it's there. Will and I were talking about this about a half an hour ago. It's insufficient, really, especially in this new world that we're facing. That disclosure is probably insufficient, and we, as a company, have already started to discuss how we make that more robust. So let's share that real quick, and let's discuss the unrepresented buyer form. All right, you should see that. Everybody see the unrepresented buyer form?
Got it.
All right. And as always, I'm monitoring the chat. Oh, Ron, throwing shade at my flower shirt? I think I just saw your shirt in Riverton. You know what? That's pretty close. That's pretty close.
I think it looks good, Mike.
Thanks. I love this shirt. It's very comfortable. I also love the style.
Let me take everybody through this. I think I've got a couple. I got an idea or two on this. What if we were asked, what's the difference in a represented buyer and an unrepresented buyer? And I think you're going to get this a lot. So even though this is really inefficient, that first paragraph, the seller's agent, notice it. So, well, actually, Mike, do you want to read it? And then I want to pause on a couple of highlights there.
So seller's agent, a real estate agent who lists a seller's property for sale, acts as the agent for the seller only, and has fiduciary duties of loyalty, full disclosure, confidentiality, and reasonable care to that seller. In practical terms, the seller hires the seller's agent to locate a buyer and negotiate a transaction with terms favorable to the seller.
Okay, hold on just a second. I made this point months ago. We'll make it again. The seller agent is not just the marketing agent. I know that we've talked a lot about making sure that clients understand, sellers understand what we spend in marketing. But the reason we spend marketing is to locate a buyer. And we've got to shift our thinking that we very likely may be working with a buyer as a customer, as our duties to the seller. Okay, so notice what this disclosure says. In practical terms, the seller hires the agent to locate a buyer and to negotiate a transaction that's favorable to the seller. In other words, our job is not to just let another agent do that. I think you gotta wrap your head around that first. Okay. And then that next sentence, Mike.
Yeah, although the seller's agent has these fiduciary duties to the seller's agent is, by law, responsible to all prospective buyers to treat them with honesty, fair dealing, and with good faith.
Yeah, so the three things there, honesty, fair dealing, and good faith, I would highlight those and put customer duties. So when I deal with an unrepresented buyer, my duty to that buyer is to be honest, act in fair dealing and good faith, while I exercise my fiduciary duty of full disclosure, confidentiality, reasonable care to the seller. Okay, so there's actually a lot baked into that little paragraph if you dissect it. So keep that in mind. Remember, your customer buyer, unrepresented, you have honesty, fair dealing, good faith. To your seller, you have full disclosure, confidentiality, reasonable care. There's a few others too. Obedience, loyalty are not listed in there. But that's, while you're being a fiduciary to a seller, you act in that way to the customer buyer. Okay, let's do the next one.
All right, buyer's agent. A real estate agent that acts as an agent for the buyer only has the same fiduciary duties to that buyer that a seller's agent has to the seller. In practical terms, the buyer hires a buyer's agent to locate a suitable property and negotiate a transaction with terms favorable to the buyer. Although the buyer's agent has these fiduciary duties to the buyer's agent is, by law, responsible to all prospective sellers to treat them with honesty, fair dealing, and with good faith.
Nice. Yeah, it's really just reversed. We all know from the NAR lawsuits that the question and on trial is the value of a buyer's agent. That's been the core of it all. The arguments are the buyer agent. Honestly, the arguments have been made that they're not worth that much. Well, we have an industry have done a very, very poor job of communicating the complexities of the problem, and then therefore the solutions to those problems have no value because there's no problems, right? We just said it's easy. We've made it look too easy. That's the problem. So hence the buyer guide, and I don't want to be too repetitive on this, but that's kind of what got us here. The buyer agent has an enormous amount of responsibility, like we do to our sellers, and it says that, right? If it's a for sale by owner seller, then that buyer agent has the same duties that the listing agent has to a customer buyer, to treat them with honesty, fair dealing, and good faith. Let's do the next one. Let's go ahead and hit the limited agency.
Okay. Confirmation of agency in this transaction. The property shown above is presently listed for sale through the company. Consequently, the company and the agent. Oh, hold on. I'm reading the wrong one. Forget that you heard any of that. That's
that's all right.
Buyer and seller. There's 3 paragraphs. It's hard to keep track of them all. A real estate agent can, with the prior written consent of the buyer and seller, represent both the buyer and seller in the same transaction. A limited agent has fiduciary duties to both the buyer and the seller, but the limited agent is also limited by a separate duty of neutrality in the negotiations between the buyer and the seller.
Yeah, and we all, I think, reminder that we cannot share any information to either side that would weaken their bargaining position. Cannot share information to either side that would weaken their position in bargaining. Okay, so that's the duty of neutrality. And limited agency has been a real source of a lot of lawsuits. It's legal to do, and it's when you do it right, it's okay. It does come with some complexities, though. And what we anticipate here is that listing agents may have requests from buyers to actually have the agent represent them in a transaction. Yeah, we've had a lot of discussions internally, guys, about what commissions may look like at Berkshire months from now. I'm not going to talk about that right now. It's just, we've got a lot of things to work out and still, a lot of layers to it. But I think right now we've got to get our heads wrapped around that my number one duty as a listing agent is to sell the property. And that means locating a buyer. And if a buyer comes to me unrepresented, my duty is to help that customer buyer purchase the home. That's going to come with a fee, right? We're likely not going to list the property for the same price and same rate as we would when we work with a customer buyer. We're going to charge for that. And yet there's a difference in an unrepresented buyer and a represented buyer, and your customer is going to ask you that. So the main purpose of this call today is to march through the things that we do for buyers and imagine what we would do as them as a customer and what we would do for them as a client and how that's a difference so that you can describe it. Say, okay, so So Mike, did you want to go through that like list we discussed, or how do you want to do that?
No, let's the one thing I think we should talk about too with this um, is the limits of the seller's agent with unrepresented buyers. I think we wanted to spend a little time on that. So, because I do believe that, and I think we have some general guidance from our past about what that looks like and what our limits are, but I think because we believe this is going to happen a lot more frequently, we feel that it's appropriate to start having these discussions about what your limits are as a seller's agent.
Okay, so let's start off with showing.
Yeah.
So can a listing agent show a buyer the property? Everyone's quiet. Yes, we could do that.
Yes, we can do that.
Do we need, even under the NAR stipulations, if nothing changes, we anticipate some will change, can a listing agent show a customer buyer the property without having anything signed? Yes or no? Sharon, you were nodding correctly, so that's correct. They don't. The listing agent again can show the property without having anything signed because the buyer is a customer, not a client.
By the way, Tara,
Yeah.
you put some question marks in there. I think for clarification, one of the stipulations in that settlement agreement was that you can't even show a home as a buyer's agent without signed agency. So that's what this question is coming from.
Thanks, Mike. That's perfect. Thank you for that catch. Yeah, Tara, that's it. The stipulation right now, wrongful. I think we all disagree with this because you can't show even one property without having a buyer broker agreement. I think this is harmful to the public. They don't know what their agent, they just met the agent likely. There's no relationship yet. This is way too heavy-handed for us to just do that. But if it does go unchanged, that's what we have right now. Okay, so from the eyes of the listing agent, can they show their property? Yes. Okay, so what about before we make an offer, and like imagine us walking through the buyer guide a little bit in that structure. Now let's look at this and let's debate the next steps. Okay, so for a client buyer to be shown, you have to have it signed as the stipulation says. All right, now we've shown the property. Questions now start coming up like, are there comps for this house? How did you come up with the sales price? Will the seller take a lower offer? What can the listing agent do with those kinds of questions? Can the listing agent pull comparables to justify a lower sales price? Yes or no? The very specific question. Can a listing agent pull comparables that would justify a lower sales price than what's listed? All right, let me phrase it a different way. Can the listing agent only pull comparables that justify the sales price that the seller has agreed to? What do you think about that? Can we pull comparables that justify the sales price the seller agreed to?
I mean, if we think about that, there's varying opinions on this in the chat. Need seller permission? No. I think your job is to justify the sales price. So yeah, we work towards that end.
Yep.
Julie says you can pull but not share unless the seller is okay with it, which is correct, right? That's a strategy that you want to get permission for. The buyer is a customer or a client. The buyer in this instance is a customer. Cindy says if we pull comps that are lower, we are not serving our seller correctly. Agree. Sherry, it hurts the seller. Agree. And Scott says many listing agents post comps in docs now. Yeah, those activities seem perfectly okay to me. As long as we're supporting our seller's position, there should be no problem with this.
Yeah, so already we've got a couple of different, this is a very fundamental, critical piece of the process. The brokered buyer, who's a client, can have their agent pull comps to justify price, no matter what the price is, lower, higher, or the same. The listing agent can only pull comparables that justify what the seller agreed is the sales price and nothing else. If there's a comp out there that would hurt the seller's position, the listing agent for a customer buyer cannot pull that information. Okay, so the difference in represented and unrepresented buyer. All right, let's move on now to them going to make offers and terms inside of an offer. Can the listing agent have an unrepresented disclosure signed and fill out the contract for a customer buyer? Yes or no? Can a listing agent fill out a REPC for a customer buyer?
I love this chat. It's just streaming.
Yeah, keep it coming. Your neurons appreciate your interaction, by the way. You remember a lot better when you.
Yeah, sorry, Will, to cut you off. So we have a mix. Scott says we can't even give them the purchase contract. No, they need to be a client to fill it out. Yes, model home agents do this now. But remember,
I'm glad we're having this huddle right now.
So, this is why it's complicated. They aren't realtors. Good point, Scott. Most of them, that's correct. Remember, you can work. You don't need a real estate license to represent the owner of property, right? If you work for them, if you're an employee, you don't need a license.
All right, we're divided.
This is a tough. This is sort of the area.
Can I chime in here quickly?
Yeah, go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
Curtis posted this a while back on the back of one of the realtor magazines, and it was a case that a buyer claimed that the listing agent was acting as a fiduciary simply for giving the documents, and the buyer won.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we started off on that. So Scott, let me answer that. If the stipulations stay the same, then we will be creating a much more in-depth, unrepresented buyer disclosure form that will hit all the points we're talking about right now. We're going to do that for a number of reasons, not only to educate the unrepresented buyer customer about what they're not getting and protect us from litigation, but to also further bolster the services of a represented agent in their life. Because this is what you're going to get, this is what you don't get. All right. So now going back to the fundamental principles, model agents who are realtors, who are licensed, inside our own company right now today, have unrepresented buyers approach them in their developments, come into their open houses, and we write offers for unrepresented buyers, and it happens often. Are there pitfalls? Of course there are. Do we run the chance of having a buyer mistakenly believe that the agent who wrote the offer for them somehow is their advocate? Yes, of course we do. Even though we just had them sign the unrepresented buyer disclosure form that says we do not represent you, and you acknowledge the disclosure of this, do we still run the risk of a buyer thinking that the agent helped them through it and they were their advocate with the seller? Absolutely. So this is why we really want to encourage people to have representation and, of course, pay for it. Because not only do you not get the services that you would get with a representation agent, there's a lot of problems that can come up with this for us as well. Okay. Nevertheless, it's the new world we're entering. I would say, don't kill the messenger. The change we have is on us. The bell has been rung. We have what we have. So. Moving forward, I do anticipate, Scott, that we'll have a much more in-depth unrepresented purchaser disclosure. So, but back to my question, can a listing agent then, with the proper disclosure, unrepresented buyer fill out a REPC for an unrepresented buyer? Yes or no? The answer is yes. They can legally do that. Just like they can legally enter limited agency with all its pitfalls, the unrepresented customer buyer can have the listing agent fill out the contract for them on their behalf as a customer, not a client. Is it preferred? Of course not, but that is exactly what we have. And we do anticipate that this is exactly what your new world will be like in 6 months from now when the new stipulations have come into effect. You're going to get people approaching you that assume that it's cheaper for them to go to you, the listing agent, and help them buy that property. Remember, your job as a listing agent is to sell the property, locate a buyer that is favorable to the seller. That is the fundamental duty of a listing agent.
And just to add to this, it just bears repeating, even though we said it already. We as a company are working on this and going to provide you very strict guidance on how to navigate these issues. From maybe creating unrepresented buyer packets that contain documents that are accessible by the public already, right? Because many of these documents, like purchase agreements, can be found on government websites and the like. So we're navigating that and all the legal pitfalls that accompany it. So this is just as part of the discussion, and we're hoping that this discussion sort of enters the Berkshire zeitgeist. Is that the right word, Will? Zeitgeist?
I have to look it up, man. That's a great word.
It's the right word. If anybody can confirm if I use the word zeitgeist correctly, I do look to use that word quite frequently. And but anyway,
what does it mean? I have no idea.
The zeitgeist is sort of like common knowledge, right? So like a dance, like some mean dance that's going on TikTok that that everybody sort of knows about, like it's entering the zeitgeist. That's a zeitgeist.
Wow.
Somebody has to know.
Impressive. The word of the day.
It's probably right.
But if we were doing CE right now, that would be one of the words you'd have to type in.
I don't even know how to spell it. So
we got a smile out of Kimmy on that one.
Rachel says, I feel like it's a giant step back for consumer protection. Buyer beware. I agree with you.
Yep. Yeah, it's forced upon us, as we all know, Rachel, and it's forced upon us. So remember, evidence was not allowed in these cases to see the effect on the consumer. That's the truth of it. Remember, Mark presented that like 3 months ago when we were talking about this, that these cases, these lawsuits, the judge did not allow any evidence to support the counter argument on what harm it might do. They were merely talking about decoupling commissions, and the seller paid and set the fee for the buyer. That was it. Not whether it was better, not the harm if it didn't happen, none of that. So yes, so we need to warn and educate the public on what happens when you're unrepresented. But no mistake about it, listing agents, customer wants to write an offer, your job is to sell that property with the proper disclosure. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Let's talk now. Let's assume we are now under contract with a customer buyer and we're the listing agent, and we've got due diligence. What's the difference in an unrepresented customer experience versus a represented experience? So let's just talk this out. All right, so they did their inspection. The buyer had an inspection. There's a list of items there. Can the listing agent negotiate with the seller? Like, are we, you know what? I'm going to strangle NAR. If NAR were a person, we would just walk in there and just go, you did this to me. This reminded me, my wife was like 8.5 months pregnant. And she's like, you, Cooper, this is your fault. You did this to me. I'm like, wait a minute. But yeah, can a listing agent negotiate with the seller on repairs?
Define negotiate.
Yeah, it's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a problem. I think in these instances, I think one of the instincts, by the way, this is a good spot to mention this. Our instincts as well, we're salespeople. Part of what we do is we're salespeople, and we want to be agreeable. And we also see that honesty thing there. Don't confuse honesty with not providing the info they asked for, because some information doesn't need to be provided, right? So when we're talking about, you have to be honest with me. You're correct, but that doesn't mean I have to disclose things, or that doesn't mean I have to agree with you, right? Those are two separate things. So when we talk about, can we negotiate this item? Well, the way we communicate towards a customer in this instance, you just need to remember those things, that the customer, they can request all they want, and it's our job to convey that information. when they ask questions like, will they accept this? Will they do that? Your answer can always just be, I'm not at liberty to disclose that. That's not something I've been given permission to disclose to you.
I love that, Mike. I need to add to that. A lot of times you think that you may know what someone is going to do because they've told you in confidence. But the fact is that people change their minds all the time. So even if they did tell you something in confidence, that doesn't mean they're going to sign on it. So you really don't know anything until you present it. Now, can you present? So let's just get down to the details here. Let's say there's about $5,000 worth of repairs in this inspection. And the buyer says to you, will you please ask the seller if they would take care of this $5,000? Can you do that? Yes, you can. Okay. Yes, you can pass on their request. This is where it starts to, you have to continue to remind people you're about to do your inspections. You remember, I represent the seller. Okay. I cannot negotiate for you, but if you have something that you want me to pass on, I can do that. Can a listing agent go and research and do other, to justify a $5,000 to $10,000 repair? Think about it from the eyes of the comparable. Could I go find other bids that justify something higher and then deliver that to my seller? Can I do that? Or can I, on behalf of the buyer, Scott, you're right, man. Scott's nailing it, by the way. He's nailing it. Like, no, you cannot. You're not going to go do research on behalf that benefits the buyer against your seller client as a customer buyer. Now, the buyer agent can do that all day long. Not only did the inspection show $5,000 and we're requesting $5,000 for repair, and I'll put that in, I'm giving that to the listing agent. Now I've changed the scenario. I represent the buyer, but I've got additional information that suggests that it could cost way more than $5,000. That's where the line gets drawn. All right. Customer experience, not going to happen. Client experience is definitely going to happen. We're definitely going to dig in. All right. And Monique, you nailed it.
Yeah, there's some comments in the chat. Tara says, I've had offers that I lost out on, and I later found out the listing agent represented both buyer and seller. Not sure my offer was seen. Should we as listing agents have the seller reject all offers to protect ourselves? I mean, we can always make that suggestion if we feel like in certain scenarios, maybe it's warranted. If you're hearing language from a buyer's agent or somebody that is questioning your ethics or questioning whether or not that's been done, probably a good idea. But remember, those are only suggestions that we can make. But yeah.
To be clear, the code of ethics only requires that the agent respond back to you affirmative. So if you can email the agent and say, I just wanted to make sure that you did present my offer. My buyer is asking. I understand you went with another offer, but I just want to verify that. And the listing agent responds back in writing and says, yes, Tara, I did present your offer. That is all the code of ethics says. The code of ethics cannot impose an action on a seller. Okay, we cannot tell a seller, you have to sign this. Now, we could advise it. We could say it would keep us out of trouble if we could just prove that you did this. But the code of ethics does not impose something upon a principal. It only is on what the agent can do. Now, could we take that and say, we have an email here that says that you did present it, but I have evidence to support from the seller because they were a friend of a friend in the ward. We heard this one once in the neighborhood and said they never did see your offer. Now, that is a code of ethics violation. And not only bigger than that, I mean, the agent just, misrepresented. And that has come up a few times. So, but all we can do is get the agent to reply in writing, Mike. Yeah, go ahead.
Didn't, I don't know if it was UAR or NAR, didn't they come out with a document that we could send over that is basically affirming this, the seller signs, like affirm that I've seen it? Or am I not remembering that correctly?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Has someone got an answer to that? I don't think there's a document per se. The code of ethics only says in writing.
Yeah. Okay. Sherry says, I say, that's a great question. I'll ask. Yeah, that's an easy, quick default answer to not commit yourself or reveal anything. It's a great question. I'll ask. Kimmy says, I just had 6 offers on a listing and I had my seller do rejections on the 5 she didn't choose. Yes, to prove I presented all 6. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a decent recommendation, right? It's a decent recommendation for people because, there's a lot of scenarios, especially in multiple offer situations, where people have the perception that we just made this incredible offer. We've got to get a response, right? Because our offer was so incredible, and there's incredibler offers out there. So
yeah, I think there's properties right now that when they hit the market and they're rare and inventory is still low, we're generating multiple offers even in the current economic climate with rates being what they are. You don't know what you're going to get. You could have a listing sit and expire, and you could have a listing sell in the weekend. We're hearing all kinds of stories. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. A mix of both markets.
yeah.
And Kimmy, you're right there. So I'd agree. I mean, it's the easiest way to debunk the belief that the listing agent didn't present. Let's move on to the next one. So now that we've done a debate, like think of what you can do under due diligence and what you cannot do. All right. Again, you cannot negotiate on behalf of the buyer to justify a request for repairs. You're not going to go pull data. You're not going to pull invoices. You're not going to do any of that, where a buyer agent could very well do that and probably should do that. And all of this is what's the difference in represented buyer and what's the difference in represented buyer? How is that experience different? So now that we're through inspections, let's just say the lender says something like, I can't get us over the financing and appraisal deadline because they don't qualify. And the only way they're going to qualify is if I have concessions paid. Akin to this would be it doesn't appraise. What can a buyer what can the listing agent do for the customer buyer? What should a buyer agent do under those circumstances? That's the next phase of this. You can't get over the financing appraisal deadline because they don't qualify. They need concessions in which to do so. What would the question be there? How would I phrase this question? Can a listing agent then help negotiate with the seller concessions? Can the listing agent pass on the information that the buyer doesn't qualify unless they have concessions?
Rachel says, tell the buyer they could ask for what they need and you'll present that to the seller.
I like your answer, Rachel, a lot.
Yeah. I think too, in the commercial world, you do get involved in a lot of limited agency situations. And it can be uncomfortable, but honestly, that generic answer is, in my experience, one of the best, because what we don't want to do is inadvertently feed into their claims, right? Because that does create some type of perception of your opinion, which you shouldn't be giving them.
And I was thinking, like, if that were me and you're the listing agent, wouldn't you call the lender again? I mean, you've already called them, or you wouldn't have gone under contract with this buyer, because you wouldn't advise your seller to go under contract with this buyer. So when you pick up the phone and call the lender again and say, hey, what changed in 3 weeks ago to today? How did we get here? Wouldn't you do that as a listing agent? And you're doing it from the eyes from the seller's perspective. Like, what's the minimum level of concession? Instead, the buyer's agent is like, well, we need, $15,000 in concessions to qualify. It's a different approach, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what about the appraisal?
Yeah, I think a big one is if the property doesn't appraise, what is your role at that point? Because, I think your role does change. If it doesn't appraise, what do you do?
Look at the difference. So the listing agent is going to provide comparables that justify the value, and the buyer agent is going to provide comparables that justify the appraisal. Right? Two different things. Did you see the wisdom in having these discussions right now? Because you've got to march through all of these scenarios to say, this is what happens when you're represented. This is what happens when you're not. Yes, I can have you be a customer buyer. This is what you get. This is what happens when you are represented by an agent. Well, I don't want to pay for that. Okay, that means you're going to give up these services from a buyer's agent. We're going to throw those aside, and you're going to be okay with the customer experience. Please sign here. So we're kind of starting to bake out of expanded disclosure that hits these points that we were just talking about, right? When it goes to make an offer, we cannot pull comparables, right? When you go to do your due diligence, I cannot help you justify or negotiate costs. When it comes to low appraisals, I cannot help you negotiate a lower sales price. When it comes to concessions, I can't help you with that. You see where this is going? That helps build the value of the represented buyer. So I hope that helps us in the end.
Yeah. Sandy says, getting the discount service you thought you wanted.
That's right.
And I I think this issue, I mean, obviously everybody can see the complexity of the issue, but I think there's an emotional part of this too, where, most people's instincts on here are like, there's the due diligence has issues, right? There's something that came up on their due diligence or their inspections and they want to resolve them. I don't think we should give them any advice on who to call or how to handle it whatsoever. Like I'm sorry, but I can't even give you any direction on handling that because that's not in the best interest of my client. Now it could be, right? There's instances where that could be, but there's also plenty of instances where, sorry, that's your problem. And that's a weird position for most people to put themselves in, to just pass the buck, right? I mean, it's not a very comfortable thing to say, I'm sorry, but that's your problem. I can't help you figure that out. It's not a comfortable thing to say.
Yeah, the counter to that. So remember when we read the buyer's disclosure, this is the law. Okay, the disclosure is a reflective form of the current state of Utah law. Okay, it's not just a UAR form. It is reflective of the law regarding what the legislator passed involving agency. And this happened in 1991. That's how far out Utah has been from this. You guys, we could thank Dave Johnson, who was, I mean, put a name to this, but Dave Johnson is a legend in our business. But he was the director of the Division of Real Estate in the 90s. He's an attorney. I think he recently retired, but he's great. And we could thank him. Like we told them, thank you for legacy work that had happened in the early 90s. But the law says that the agent's duty to the customer includes three things: honesty, fair dealing, and good faith. So when we say things like, that's your problem, we might be butting up against fair dealing and good faith. So that's a tightrope. I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves. When dealing with an unrepresented customer buyer, did what I say or do violate my duty of fair dealing and good faith? Because I can't sabotage them. I can't intentionally know that there's a minefield in front of them and then not warn them. I can say, you understand that you have a deadline coming up for due diligence. Have you selected your inspector? I'm happy to schedule it for you. I can say that. And then they say, yes, I have my inspection. Great. You understand that you have a financing and appraisal deadline coming up. Now, I know some agents are going to say, I don't care if they run into that. I don't care if that thing comes and goes because that's non-refundable money. Well, I'm not saying you're calling them the night before going, do you want to cancel this deal? No, I'm not doing that as a listing agent. I'm not going to call them and go, do you want me to put together a contingent cancellation form? You guys with me? Like, this is critical to know. You're not going to do that, but you are days, weeks before, say, how are you doing with your lender? Because you do have a deadline next week. That's it. I'm done. But I'm not going to do what a buyer agent's going to do, which is the night before going, hey, I just got off the phone with your lender. Your earnest money is non-refundable tomorrow at 5, and he just told me you're not approved. Maybe we should ask for an extension. That's not going to happen with a listing agent. Unless the buyer comes forward and says, Mike, I just got off the phone with the lender. They can't get me approved yet. He says he needs more time. He said maybe we should extend it. Can you do that? I said, well, I'm happy to put forward an addendum and put it in front of the seller. I have no idea what they'll say. They may not accept it at all. They may just cancel, right?
Some good comments in the chat. Sandy says, for a customer, can you even advise them on what they need to consider on checking during due diligence, let alone help them schedule or provide contacts?
It's a good question, Sandy. We would give them the list of disclosure items and point out to the rep sheet and say, look, this is the rep sheet. This is what we're going to give you. You're going to comb through this. You let me know what you think.
Yeah.
That we have to do under good faith and fair dealing, but we are not going any further than that.
Rachel says in response to that question, that's what the due diligence checklist doc is for. Sandy says we need to remember not to act desperately to keep a contract from failing by trying to help an unrepresented buyer where this seems like a good idea at the time. It never ends well. Yeah, this is the minefield, isn't it? It's sort of, there's a weird balancing act between representing your seller and keeping the deal alive.
Yeah,
which is also in the best interest of us.
Sometimes you have to concede with what the buyer wants to keep the deal alive, but who makes that decision? The seller does.
Yeah.
And the difference is the role in which the agent's playing here. A buyer agent is making a case and going above and beyond to make the case that's favorable to the buyer. The listing agent is going above and beyond to make the case favorable for the seller.
Sydney has wants to get something clarified. We wouldn't want to arrange a home inspection with unrepresented buyer or customer, correct? Question mark.
Yeah, when the buyer customer says, I have a home inspector, I would like to have my inspection. Yeah, you're going to go ahead and schedule that.
I think maybe what she's saying, well, I'm just guessing. So yeah, we're gonna make arrangements for the home inspection, but the arrangements aren't us calling the home inspector. Like, what is there a line there? I think is that what you're asking, Sydney?
Yeah, I think that's probably where you're coming from. As far as the secretarial work, I guess you could say, or administrative work of just scheduling the time, yes, we would do that. But we're not going to, be surfing through all the inspectors or calling them and, priming any issues or anything like that. We're just going to let the inspector do his job, and whatever they come up with, they come up with. Where a buyer's agent might get out ahead of this and say, hey, we want you to take a closer look at some things. We want to negotiate something here, so could you please take a bigger look at the garage roof? Something like that. The listing agent's not going to do that. Now, remember that there's no justification in material facts not being disclosed. Okay. It doesn't matter who you represent. If it's material fact, it's disclosed. Doesn't matter. Customer, client, doesn't matter. All right. But when it comes to negotiations and things like that, where they use the due diligence to negotiate favorable terms, buyer agent goes above and beyond, listing agent goes above and beyond only for the seller. Great. Okay. Well, we only have 13 minutes left and we haven't gotten to the other topics much.
That's okay.
Yeah, I like this one where you think about it in that 12th, 11th hour. It's almost midnight and earnest money is going to be non-refundable. A buyer's agent is talking about that specifically with the buyer to protect their earnest money, maybe even produces a contingent cancellation if the deadline's not extended. But the customer experience is, I told you about that last week. I warned you and I sent you an email and said, remember your deadlines. Remember, we went over this. And in the disclosure form that you signed, it says, I'm going to give you a copy. You'll have a copy of the contract. By the way, that's state law. Doesn't matter who you represent. I don't know if you guys knew that. Doesn't matter who you represent. All parties have to get a signed copy of the contract. And I reminded you what your deadlines were. I didn't call you last night and tell you you're about to expire. What you knew what you were signing when we signed it, right? See the difference? Like, we really, really, really need buyers to be represented. And we need buyers to see the value. And we need buyers to pay for that when necessary. That's what we need. That's the solution. That's it. We go right back to 3 and 3. Someone said the other day, I thought it was very, very wide. Like, this is their assessment. There's going to be chaos for about 6 months. People are going to try all kinds of stuff. We're going to see all kinds of BACs everywhere. And then they're going to realize that the best way to sell their home is the way it's always been. Hire buyer agents and your listing agent to help you sell the home. And in order to do that, you need 3% on each side. That's how you do it. Your days on market decrease and your net at closing increases when you hire all the agents to do that. If you only hire the listing agent to sell your property, you're going to sell for less. So we'll be right back where we were. Nicole, you agree? I see you nodding. Thank you for nodding. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty dang good prediction, you know? Like, are we just going to throw out decades of experiments on this? I mean, you don't just not pay buyer's agent. Hey, wasn't it Kim Phipps? Maybe Kimmy, you saw this. She sent me something happened in Reno. Do you guys see that? I don't know, maybe in your office, Kimmy, if you saw that. Reno, let me see if I can find the picture really quick. Their board of realtors sent out like, yeah, right here. Here it goes. It says attention. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but see that? Okay, I'll read it to you. It says, sellers are not required to offer compensation to buyer's agent, exclamation point. The choice is yours. So check a box, okay? You check a box. Which box, top or bottom? Trenda, does that look familiar? You saw this? It says, the top box says, yes, I want to offer appropriate compensation to buyer's agents so they will bring attention to the most amount of buyers to show my property and give my property the best chance of selling at the highest price in the least amount of time by exposing my property to the most amount of people. That's box number one. Box number two says, no, I want to possibly exclude thousands of potential buyers from seeing my property by excluding buyer's agents who are unwilling to work for free and who have buyers that are unable to pay the buyer's agent fee out of their own pocket, resulting in less exposure for my property. And it's like, mic drop. Boom. There it is. You know, no court case, no lawsuit is going to change that. But guess we're about to find out.
Yeah. Kimberly says, I just want a listing at a full 6%. The other two agents offer to basically do it for free. All caps. Learn your value and how to express it. Congrats, Kimberly. And I like Scott's graph. You're going to have to click on that. You know, Scott's graph reminds me that, you know, sometimes just to, and I told Chris Visser this the other day. I said, you know, being a little brash gets people a long way. But it also, like, you know, there is some ignorance in there. You could be, I have little experience and much confidence. Like, that actually could get you pretty far. Confidence, baby. Yes, the Dunning-Kruger effect. For sale by owner, unrepresented buyers are in the upper left spike. Yes, exactly.
Yep. I appreciate you sharing that, Scott. That's good. Yeah, I hope that, you know, the summation of all of this, you actually feel a lot more confident about your ability to have a buyer commission, even though we focus so much on unrepresented buyer today. But you're going to get asked this, what's the difference? And you need to be able to march through each one of these scenarios with buyers. And so they understand. The company's position is we will give you the legal asset and the ammunition to help you make these cases. So we're going to see an expanded unrepresented buyer disclosure form that addresses each one of these issues. Like, I understand when it comes to negotiating a price that the listing agent cannot provide comparables to me. I understand when I go to write the offer that the listing agent is writing terms favorable to the seller. I understand, right? You're just going to march through all these things. And I'm giving up all of my ability to be represented under each one of these categories. And maybe by the end of it, they're like, yeah, that sounds ugly. Well, it's the truth.
You know, I think we as an industry, we need, this is my idea. So if anybody steals it, it's a lawsuit. Okay.
You want to take credit? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to let you just get away with it. But
well, we are recording it, Mike. We're recording.
We are.
It,
so this is essentially in writing. I think we need an app on all our phones when we go through these documents so we can at least have some evidence, like, no, sir, you have to say yes or no to this response. Oh. Yes. just like a deposition, right? Like we really get it on video and then it just, uploads the cloud and we can forget about it. I'm inventing this.
Yeah,
The
you
disclosure.
prop your phone up and you go, okay, I'm going to hit this app now to record this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Hey,
all
can
right.
I make a comment, Will?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so, you guys take this for what it's worth. This is just coming from Kimberly, who like, what the heck do I know? But I think the days of being the realtor who signs the listing agreement, I don't care what percent you end up signing it for, and slapping it on the MLS are done. People want to see what value you are bringing. And quite frankly, they are willing to pay for it, but they want to see it. So start showing your value. Don't just talk the talk, start walking the walk. And what I mean is, if that means paying for a home stager to come in and stage the home, then do that. If it means getting a cleaner in there to clean it up really good because the seller didn't leave it clean, then pay for the cleaner to get in there and get it cleaned. Like, I just feel like you guys, we are self-employed. This is our business. Start treating it like a business. You have to put in money to make money. And if you're not willing to do that, you're going to die on the vine. Like, you have to start treating your business like a business. You have to put money into your business to get money out of your business.
Well said.
There's my TED Talk.
Now, Kimberly, the only correction I would make there is instead of how you introduce yourself, you should be, I'm Kimberly, and of course you should listen to what I have to say. Like, what are you discounting yourself for? I mean, like, what do you got to cut yourself out from the knees? I'm just little old me. No, I'm Kimberly. You should totally listen to me, and people should.
Hey, I appreciate that. I'm actually getting so good at selling my value, you guys. I think I'm going to start giving one-on-one coaching lessons. And I will say, I'm going to just pat myself on the back because, hey, why not? We need to do that once in a while. But in the chat, this listing that I just got, they're coming in tomorrow morning to sign with me. I was competing against 2 other agents. One of them was the agent that helped them buy the house a few years ago and basically offered to do it for free. They still went with me. So sell your value, know how to tell your value, and don't give up so easily on, don't just give your value away.
Love it.
Couple of comments in the chat. Sandy says, Berkshire is so on top of their game. Tell me how many other brokerages are already thinking about putting together material like this for their agents. There are many brokerages who don't put anything together for their agents. Tara says, do model home agents have an unrepresented buyer disclosure form that they use now? Good question.
Yeah, well, it's required, Tara. So in the state of Utah, you have to represent one side or the other. There is no neutral negotiator. There's no agent who doesn't represent a party in Utah. Other states do have that. So if you're going to be a seller's agent and represent the seller and you work with a customer buyer, it is law to disclose that they're unrepresented. They have to sign this form. And so model agent or not, they still have to say, I do not represent you. It's just the form is terribly overly simplified. There's a lot in it, sure, but it does not break it down. Remember, look, everything Kim Phipps just said is so true. And I think she's asking agents from your side of the ledger, what are you doing as an agent, right? And I think you've got to also build on what the choice that you make to be at Berkshire. Not every agent chooses to be at a company like this for a reason. Let's just call it like it is. They want it cheaper. Go tell the public why you're at Berkshire, because it's better for them. That's why you're at Berkshire. So you've already made a fundamental principle that they're more important in your decision. Then you add on what Kim has, you're unbeatable. Then in your presentation and your messaging, make sure you slow down and talk about the villains. What we did on this call today, it took us an hour to do it. But when someone asked, what's the difference in a represented buyer and an unrepresented buyer? I said, okay, well, a lot. Let's take you through it. Starting with showing the home, then making an offer and what the price is going to be. Then how is due diligence going to work? And what happens with negotiations and concessions? What happens if there's a low appraisal? Okay, just march them through all these things. There's a huge difference in what one agent can do and the other agent cannot do. When you show people the villain in the story, you become the hero because you provide the solution. Then you have value. I've said this before, but value, problem, solution, and value is a lab experiment, like two elements. If you take the element, think of the periodic table, and we're going to do an experiment on elements in the periodic table. We're going to take one element called problem, and we're going to take another element called solution, and we're going to combine those two molecules together. Guess what happens when they meet each other? When solution meets problem, it creates a new element called value. Isn't that awesome? When solution meets problem element and we combine those molecules together, we get value. So you cannot present your value, as Kim said, unless you talk about problem first and then solution and combine those together. Like heroes and villains, combine them together. And then you got it. Love it? Cindy's like, amen, brother. See? And he's like, I preach the word, Cooper. Preach the word.
Hey, can I ask a quick question?
You sure can, Cindy.
Thank you. I'm glad this was recorded because I missed half of it on a phone call overseas and the disturbing phone call. Coop, here's what I'm wondering. Mike, I'm looking at my recent CMAs that I have done for my sellers. And I do not see where in the MLS's CMA or Moxie Present or Cloud CMA, the three platforms I use to make a seller CMA, I don't see where it lists the buyer agent commission. What I want to do is make a new CMA form that has a field to show each house what did they pay in buyer agent commission, so that when I'm talking to the sellers with showing them the properties I believe are most that the appraiser will most likely use in supporting our value. Look how much ABC Main Street, they paid a 3%. Oh, look, 225 Jupiter, they paid 1%. On how many days were they on that? Like, I want to use that as a tool. I think that's a very, very strong tool for us going in with our sellers right now. And it speaks volumes. So I am on a mission to create a new CMA or somehow I was going to call Forrest over at our MLS. Yeah, I'm sure you've all had the pleasure to speak with Forrest, the IT support guy, and ask him, how can I do that? I'll report back what I come up with. But if any of you have ideas of where we can make that a field and have it be in our comparable market analysis, I think it'll be great. Thank you.
That's
for
really
that.
good tip. And I love that. Everyone write that one down when you're talking about comparables with sellers. Look at the BAC, because they're going to be surprised to find out that their neighbors and other comps are using full 3% BACs, and they're having great results with that. So that's excellent. We are out of time. We are at the close of our segment for Huddle.
Coop, real quick.
Yeah.
And guys, it works the same way with the buyers. So let's say we're going to have a buyer presentation like I'm preparing for my gals coming in Monday morning, April Fool's, no joke. And when I pull her those comparable properties of what we're going to go look at, because I already know where she's pre-approved. Oh, let's take a look at all of those houses, the BAC, what was paid, because we're going to be talking about signing the buyer broker agreement. She can see, oh, well, look at all those houses. They're all off, right? So right now, that is a tool that we can use on the opposites. And just wanted to insert that this is also a tool for us on the other side.
Nice. Hey, you spawned a thought real quick. Last parting thought. Thanks for that, Cindy. The company right now is taking a snapshot of every market that we're in, because we can now get BACs on the MLS. And then we're going to take another snapshot at the very end when it becomes prohibited to do so. so that we can see if there's any trends, okay? And we'll keep up on that data. It's a very manual process because, as you know, you cannot search properties by BAC. You have to dump all the data into an Excel spreadsheet and separate it out manually. But we did figure out a way to do that, and we will provide that trending data if it's needed, okay? Hey, love you all. Mike, don't you just love every single person who's on this huddle? Look at
Absolutely.
Yep, they're amazing. So I hope you have an amazing day. Thanks for everyone who had their input today. You made it a great discussion. Go out there and help someone. You're fantastic. So go out there and help somebody.